Joe Rogan probably spends more time in front of a camera than any figure within the sport of mixed martial arts. So with that being the case, it's only natural that he has managed to compile quite a history of poorly advised comments and bad decisions over the years. With that in mind, we're going to take a look at some of Joe Rogan's less than impressive moments, things that he would more than likely prefer if his fans forgot entirely. Number 10. Rhonda Rousey. The Rhonda Rousey era. It seems like a lifetime ago, but during the height of this former Olympian's fame, nothing seemed to be out of the question as far as the 135-pound champ was concerned. Though certainly one of the most talented fighters in the history of the sport, Rhonda's greatest strengths, of course, lay in her judo and her ability to snatch up arms. And to say that people got carried away in their assessment of her striking would be putting it lightly. Joe Rogan, in one of his most memorably misguided moments, claimed that Rhonda would decisively defeat Floyd Mayweather in a street fight, citing Mayweather's singularly focused skill set as something that would leave him totally defenseless in the face of Rousey's takedowns. And sure, there's an argument to be made about how a fight between an MMA athlete and a boxer would go, but even Joe was forced to admit that he got carried away.
I mean, I pumped her up.
Everybody pumped her up.
But it was me doing a lot of but it was based on what she'd been able to accomplish. It wasn't based on bullshit.
And when Rhonda's downfall did finally come, boy was it ugly. Number 9. Rules changes. There are, of course, some arguments to be made against the current gloves used in the UFC and how their build creates problems as far as the ever-present threat of eye pokes is concerned. But even with these issues being the case, the gloves still protect fighters and their hands, lowering the risk of any unnecessary breakages either in the moment or from the buildup of damage. And as far as Rogan's bad takes go, his own ideal version of MMA would be set in a basketball court-sized cage with no gloves. No, seriously, that's what Joe called for at one point in time. A bad take? Perhaps, but more than anything, another example of the type of careless opinion spouting Rogan would probably prefer was never brought up again. The thought of two fighters chasing each other around a huge basketball court is not something I ever want to see become a reality. Number 8. Jon Jones. While Joe will quickly make comments about the likes of Jose Aldo, despite having zero proof of any wrongdoing, his consistent defense of Jon Jones' alleged steroid use has caused many fans to question his integrity. Joe, of course, works for the UFC, and after the picogram debacle that saw an entire UFC event moved from Vegas to California in order to keep a positive test from Jon Jones from being an issue,
stay in a system in those kind of sizes of the molecule. It's like some 500 millionth of a grain of sand or something like that. So Andy Foster has said the same metabolite for the same substance that he tested positive for, that this is the same instance, that the number of it, and it indicates that this is something he's already been punished for. It's the same exact. He's already gone through his steps, and this is just a infinitesimally small metabolite. That's what I'm hearing.
Rogan's valiant defense of the 205-pound champ certainly rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. From bringing on USADA's Jeff Novitzky to settling on a hypothesis that left Joe putting too much belief in Jones's reputation as a wild guy. There was just something off about Rogan's passionate resistance to taking a far more plausible stance on the whole thing. Number 7. Taekwondo. Though Joe's background has its roots in Taekwondo, in the time since he left the sport behind him, Rogan has certainly been critical of the martial art in the years that came after. Supposedly, Rogan felt he was ill-equipped for his amateur kickboxing by his years of learning Taekwondo. And while he has softened his stance in recent times, some of his comments did cause offense to those within the sports community. Fans of Rogan's who practice Taekwondo will no doubt be upset to hear this, but as always, Rogan has never been one to mince words when it comes to sharing his opinions. And when you have the single biggest podcast on the planet, it's easy to see how someone could end up getting themselves in hot water. Number 6. Khabib vs. Iaquinta. Commenter bias is always going to be a problem to some extent, but in the case of Joe Rogan, his habit of stubbornly sticking to his own narrative has seen him come under increasing amounts of criticism over the years. And there was perhaps no fight that showed that clearer than Khabib Nurmagomedov's title-winning domination of Al Iaquinta. If you asked Joe Rogan honestly, he'd probably wish that this fight was stricken from his back catalog entirely. To put it plainly, Khabib was excellent from start to finish, controlling the momentum of the fight without much issue. However, Rogan, giving far too much credit to Iaquinta, chose to completely oversell everything he did, changing the narrative mid-fight to suit his points. As you would expect, the public did not appreciate this one bit, leading Rogan to apologize shortly after. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it did appear as though Rogan was coming under more criticism than usual, something that can perhaps be attributed to the lack of crowds to really build the atmosphere. Number 5. Alex Jones. Though it's no secret that Joe Rogan holds a very close relationship with the divisive figure that is Alex Jones, even Rogan himself must have been shocked to see just how significant a level of backlash he was subjected to after the conspiracy enthusiast Jones had his most recent appearance on the podcast. Joe himself has surely been feeling the weight of his roles as more of an influential figure than he would have ever imagined himself being. But for a lot of those who criticize him, Rogan's casual approach to offering up his platform has rubbed them up the wrong way. Joe has said quite a number of things that have gotten him in hot water in the past. But for many people, it's his willingness to humor even the wildest of opinions that is doing more damage than good. Number 4. Daniel Cormier. Who can forget the highly emotional post-fight interview that saw Daniel Cormier reduced to a sobbing mess on live TV in the wake of his UFC 214 defeat at the hands of Jon Jones? Needless to say, it was a pretty rough moment that, in reality, should never have reached our TV sets. But what most people don't realize is that it was Joe Rogan who made the final call on interviewing his clearly confused friend and fellow training partner. To those in attendance and to those of us at home, the interview bordered on tough to watch, as the heartbroken Cormier attempted to compose himself enough to deliver for millions upon millions of people. A bad call on Rogan's part without question, and one that resulted in quite a large number of embarrassing memes directed at Cormier. As if losing one of the biggest fights of your life wasn't bad enough, huh? Number 3. Conor McGregor. On the subject of misguided decisions inside the octagon, Joe also came under quite a bit of fire recently after he decided to interview Conor McGregor in the wake of his doctor stoppage TKO defeat at the hands of Dustin Poirier at UFC 264. Again, Rogan is the guy who had the responsibility once the fight's result was read, and despite the fact that Conor was clearly in a state of shock and full to the brim on adrenaline after, his leg was just snapped. Even with this in mind, Rogan opted to put a microphone in front of his face, and though the resulting interview was good television, in it, McGregor was put in a situation where, like Cormier, he was forced to speak to millions of people. The resulting interview was a display of pure anger from the Irishman, and though it sowed the seeds for his eventual return, whenever that may be, all in all, it probably never should have happened. Number 2. Friends in the business. Though Rogan tries to maintain an unbiased approach to his commentary, when several of his friends who also happen to be fighters are competing, it clearly can be hard for him to do so. Examples of good friends of Rogan's who are well-known athletes are Donald Cerrone, Ben Saunders, and Brendan Schaub. Joe himself will be the first to tell you that it's a lot harder to be impartial when you have a personal relationship with the fighters in question. That said, the instances of bias that come through in Rogan's commentary are few and far between, even if those of us who notice it have our enjoyment of the fights impacted by Joe's narratives. Number 1. Jose Aldo. And finally, we come to something of an odd trend in Joe's commentary work. Over the years, there have been numerous instances of Rogan being completely unfair to the legendary former two-time featherweight champion, Jose Aldo. From completely no-selling his best work in his fights to focusing in on his opponents having the most minuscule levels of success. Things certainly came to a head when the leaked audio during the UFC 194 walkouts displayed Rogan wondering out loud about potential PED use from the champ, calling his body soft-looking. Whether it was his clearly biased commentary work for Aldo's title defenses against the likes of Mark Hominick or Kenny Florian, or even the famous ice bucket incident that saw Rogan shouting at both Aldo and Renan Barão as they made a mess of the octagon when cornering their teammate Jonas Torres. There's certainly a good chance that Joe doesn't even realize he's doing it, but there have been too many instances of Joe taking shots at Jose Aldo to ignore any further. The second that both Conor McGregor and Max Holloway touched the UFC championship title, Rogan was ready to call them the 145-pound GOAT, despite Aldo's decade-long run. Seriously, Joe, did the man do something to offend you? And that will just about do it for this video. What do you think of Joe Rogan and his position as the UFC's go-to color commentator? Do let us know in the comments section below before subscribing to the channel so you can stay up to date with all of our latest uploads. Thanks for watching.